Well, one thing we can count on is when it's summer, there's going to be at least one heat wave. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 38 and a half years. I am in the middle of my summer because I'm in the northern hemisphere, as many of you are, but I'm sure that those of you in the south are probably longing for the hot weather. It's good to enjoy every season that we're in because, believe me, hot weather will be with you soon enough if it's not already here. Those of us with MS have even more reason to be a little dubious about the coming of the hot weather because as much as we love warmth and sunshine, we know that there can be too much of a good thing. I saw an article in MedPage today that was quite relevant, even though it didn't address MS specifically. Every morning in my email inbox, I get a publication from MedPage Today called Morning Break. On the issue for August 11th, 2023, they had an article that said the following: the unprecedented heat wave covering much of the United States has revealed a different type of health inequity. Worse effects on people with chronic conditions such as diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Now that caught my eye because I thought, yeah, well, we already know that people with multiple sclerosis tend to suffer from the heat, and I wondered if there was more information out on the internet that would give us some insights. The first thing I did was to go out to the actual article that they mentioned. It was on the NPR site. It's a public health article, and it's entitled How Heat Makes Health Inequity Worse, Hitting People with Risks Like Diabetes Harder. And it was published on August 10th of 2023, so pretty recent. So here's what the article said that I found interesting. Like most public health issues in the United States, extreme heat is also a health equity issue, says Katana, who is a cardiologist at the University of Pennsylvania and the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Philadelphia. Record heat scorching the country is especially dangerous for the many, many people with common conditions like diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. And I think you could probably put multiple sclerosis in there too, though they haven't mentioned it. And within cities, many vulnerable communities face greater exposure to heat, fewer resources to address or escape it, and higher rates of the diseases that make heat more dangerous for people. I think this is a really good warning, since we've had some very, very high temperatures, especially if you live in certain regions of the country or the world, not to mention that there are some raging fires in places like Greece and Maui. The summer always brings fire, but it does seem like we have had a few spectacular ones this past summer, and we're not even done yet. Risk piled upon risk. Katana, who also has a master's in public health, is well acquainted with how these risk factors overlap. There's some evidence that the greatest proportion of deaths that occur related to extreme heat are likely due to cardiovascular conditions, says Katana. Heat stroke happens when the body's core temperature rises so fast and high it rapidly becomes lethal. The heart pumps blood away from vital organs to dissipate heat. That can overload weakened hearts or lungs. Many of his patients also have obesity or diabetes, which can affect circulation and nerve function. That also affects the ability to adapt to heat. Well, I'm going to, again, throw multiple sclerosis in there. I think what he's describing about how the core temperature rises, we're very familiar with that. Our symptoms become much more pronounced when we are overheated, whether it be an internal rise in our temperature from either exertion, exercise, what have you, or sitting in a hot car or out in the hot sun for too long. And for some people, even hot showers and hot baths, they will increase your fatigue, they will make your clumsiness worse, your mental processes will slow down. we are not immune, of course, from this very thing that's being described here, heat stroke. So folks with multiple sclerosis need to be doubly careful about letting themselves get overly heated, because it may be your MS symptoms acting up, but it may be worse than that. So it may be something that could kill you. So you definitely don't want to let it go on for too long. And also important is that he says common medications that his patients take for heart disease, like beta blockers and diuretics, can make heat symptoms worse. I haven't researched the effects of all the meds that we take for multiple sclerosis and whether those make us more likely to have problems in the heat. But I know that even some folks with multiple sclerosis are taking things like beta blockers and diuretics for other conditions. So it's just something to be really aware of and to be careful of. Just as a quick aside, here's some information from a website from Single Care called The Checkup. And Single Care, I don't know a lot about them, but they are certified by the Better Business Bureau, so they are reputable. Here's what they would have to say about some of the medications that you need to be careful of because they make you more sensitive to heat. 6 medications that cause heat intolerance. I'm not going to go into detail. I'll link the article below. But here they are just in general. Any blood pressure medication is possible for making you more sensitive to heat. So if you have high blood pressure, you might want to check that out. Antihistamines, such as Benadryl. So it can be an over-the-counter thing too. It doesn't even have to be prescription medication. So if you're taking antihistamines, be careful because it will increase your heat intolerance. Decongestants, likewise, also things that are over the counter. So if you have a cold, and you could even get a cold in the summertime, so things like Sudafed could cause you to be more heat intolerant. Overactive bladder treatments. Now this one I think would be very relevant for us with MS because quite a few of us have bladder problems, bladder incontinence, and we are on some kind of medication for hyperactive bladder. And so you might want to check and make sure that the one that you're taking is not going to cause you more heat intolerance, or at least be aware that it does. Stimulant medications for ADHD, which again may also be something you're dealing with in addition to your MS. So Adderall and other medications can do this as well. And then finally, psychiatric medications. So some of the medications that are used to treat various mental health problems can also make you more heat intolerant. So you might want to check into that. There are many different medications that could be prescribed, and I'm sure not all of them are going to do this. He's not saying that people shouldn't be taking these medications. It's just highlighting the fact that some of the medications that are necessary for people with heart disease can also impair the body's response to heat exposure. And then they talk about the inequity part. They say that just as seen in other public health concerns like obesity or COVID-19, the elderly, communities of color, and people with lower socioeconomic status bear the highest risk. Those most in danger live in the Deep South and across the Midwest, where heat, older populations, and rates of complicating disease run highest. And I think that's where MS comes in, is because if you are dealing with heat and you have limited ability to escape the heat, and you have MS, you might really be at a higher risk. Tana is saying that he fears the public measures to fight heat won't reach the people most at risk. And I know that there are some communities that provide cooling centers where people who do not have air conditioning or the homeless or other folks that can't get out of the sun can go to these cooling centers just to cool down and enjoy the air conditioning and some water. And there's always a but. It's a little bit disorganized for many places, he says. It's unclear how people are going to get to these cooling centers. Is there appropriate public transportation? How are people going to be made aware that where these centers are? Is someone going to reach out to people who perhaps are physically impaired? Those are excellent questions, and they're just as pertinent for those of us with MS. I've talked in other videos about how important it is to be prepared. And this is one area where you do need to be prepared. If you are not able to keep your house cool or have access to cooling beverages, or let's say you have a power outage, you do need to know what your resources are so that you do not just sit in a hot house. And one suggestion that he has from a public health point of view is that if the communities would plant trees and create areas of shade so that people have a way of protecting themselves in extreme heat. He also notes changes in roofing materials to make them reflect rather than absorb heat, helping in communities where air conditioning can be more scarce. That's something too, that if you're making a choice about your roofing, you might think about that. Now, of course, it will depend on your problems in your climate. The shingles on our house are black, I will say, and that isn't the most fun in the summertime, but it's very nice in the wintertime because black will help melt the snow and ice off the roof a lot faster. So there's a trade-off there. But if you have to decide what's best for you and your health. And then we'll just look at a site out of Australia, MS Queensland, for some tips that I'm sure that you've seen many of these before, but again, this is a good reminder given that we are in the midst of a heat wave. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's just good to keep these things in mind. This article is about heat sensitivity and multiple sclerosis. And it says that, of course, many of us who live with MS find that the heat makes our symptoms worse. In the next section, they say people living with multiple sclerosis often experience a reaction to heat and a buildup of symptoms as a result. Depending on your situation, you may notice an increase in fatigue, blurred vision, loss of balance, or a flare-up of problems with concentration, memory, or other cognitive symptoms, particularly on a hot day, during exercise, or in an overheated space. The effects of heat don't cause permanent damage to nerves, and you should feel better once cool. And this is important. Just because we feel really crummy in the heat doesn't mean that it's making our MS worse. It's just bringing out symptoms that we normally don't deal with, at least in such an exacerbated way. And then it says you might also experience heat sensitivity with colds, flu, or other infections that cause a rise in body temperature. Remember that symptoms subside as your body temperature decreases, so it's good to find ways to keep cool. I would attest to that because I was sick right at the beginning of the year, and I'm sure I must have been running some kind of low-grade fever because I was totally fatigued and my legs could not support me. So again, it exacerbated the nerve transmission problems that I tend to have anyway. Then they go on to the good stuff, managing heat sensitivities. They talk about personal cooling. Cool your body from the outside, clothing, find shade, monitor your temperatures, use body cooling sprays, cooling garments, or other products. And there are some really good cooling vests out there now that do not look so bulky. There's one even that I understand you can wear underneath your regular clothing so that it doesn't look so, shall we say, unfashionable. Also, cool your insides and stay hydrated. Oh yes, I cannot stress this enough. Because you might not always have control over the external temperature, but you can certainly keep yourself hydrated. Even tepid water is better than no water at all. I know it doesn't sound very appealing, but if it's all you've got, don't waste the opportunity to stay hydrated. Drink fluids, especially water, but limit caffeine, which can interfere with sleep and increase fatigue. You could also suck an ice cube, icy pole, or frozen fruit chunks. I don't know about this icy pole thing. I watched A Christmas Story, and even though it's summer, I guess I'm never going to be doing that. The next thing they say is if you're on the move, avoid direct hot sun, rest during hot temperatures, park under cover, or if outdoors, use a windscreen shield. Call ahead to destinations about air conditioning or consider shopping online or using a delivery service. I think those are all good pieces of advice. One thing I have noticed is that any kind of shade will drop the temperature a little bit, maybe not tons, but sitting in direct sun is probably the quickest way to start feeling really crummy. It kind of makes me wonder how many people with MS also have a suntan, because I don't think most people with MS could sit in the sun long enough to get a tan. I'd love to know. What do you think? And then exercise. Choose a cool or shady environment, exercise gently, and rest often. Pre-cool yourself with cold drinks or a cold shower, or spray yourself with cool water. And I think that would be a thing you could think about doing. They do sell misters that you can use, or even a spray bottle. They're relatively inexpensive, and you just could have that handy and spray yourself with just a mist of water. I would hope that it could help us feel better. Then, as for clothing, they suggest wearing lightweight, loose clothing, light colors, and hats. And then a cool bath or shower or using a cooling suit before the activity can give you more energy. And finally, some people find eating makes them warmer and prefer salads or other cold meals and or sip ice water while eating. And that's a good thing. I mean, most of us don't really crave meat and potatoes when it's 100 degrees outside. So that almost makes intuitive sense, right? So don't feel bad if you don't want anything but salads. Of course, some of us might not want anything but ice cream, but I think that might be a little bit detrimental to our health in the long run. So think about food choices and lay in a supply of things that you know you can eat without having to cook them. The other thing that they don't mention here is that cooking heats up your house. Even if you're using the stove or if you're using a toaster oven, those things can heat up your kitchen, and that's not really what you want either. Then they suggest how to keep your environment cool. Keep your home cool, use a fan, air conditioner, or evaporative cooler. Turn central heating down or off. Well, okay, we are actually pretty commonsensical. We would probably already have done that, but just in case, there it is. And then number 3, when you take a bath or shower, preferably start with tepid water. If you can stand that, yeah, keep the water as cool as you can stand it. Personally, I cannot really stand taking a cold or cool or even tepid shower. The water has to be pretty warm, but I don't take long showers. I get what I need done, and I get out, because I know if I stay in too long, that won't be a good thing. Then they say a floor or desk fan can help keep the temperature down and the air, I think they mean flowing, in a room. Ceiling fans or any kind of room fan, and I'm not talking about opening the windows, because I think sometimes that's not a good idea, especially if you live in a humid climate. But if you have fans in the room just blowing air around, what I find is air that's moving feels a lot better than air that's stagnant. And the temperature can even be in what one would call reasonable, and I would still be uncomfortable if the air isn't moving around. A handheld fan can be useful when moving around. We actually, for Mother's Day at our church, they gave out fans, handheld fans that people could use to keep themselves cool during the service if it got too warm. And I have seen some of the ladies using it, so it is a really good idea to have one in your purse or just keep one around. And then finally, close the curtains or blinds to help keep rooms cool. One of the things that we did this summer that I think helped a lot was, even though we live in a part of the country where it cools down pretty well at night, we just are not opening the windows at all. We're keeping the air conditioner running on low all the time with the windows closed, which keeps the heat load from ever building up in the house. Even when we're not in the house, we keep the air conditioner running. I know that may not be the best for the power bill, but it's certainly better for me and my health, and I would just as soon not be dragging around because I'm too hot. I think many of us already know most of this, but it's just a good reminder, since I don't know about you where you live exactly, but even though the temperatures have been reasonably cool this week, we're supposed to get 99, 100, 100 plus in the coming weeks, so I'm definitely getting myself ready. One of the things that I am doing, of course, Hydration. You've got to have hydration. Keep some water handy or some kind of cool beverage because cooling your insides does a lot of good, even when the outside is too hot. And that's all I have for you today. Take really good care of yourself, and I'll see you again in my next video.